Sometimes, I feel like silence is louder than any gunshot. It seeps under your skin, leaving behind a hollow emptiness no words or memories can ever fill. I got used to the sounds of war, the rhythmic click of a bolt, the sharp, clipped commands, the distant roar of helicopters fading into a bloody sunset. Those sounds became part of me. Like breathing. They shaped who I am. Taught me to tell truth from lies, fear from instinct. But that was a long time ago. Now, my morning begins with the software of the coffee machine. I wake up at 5:30, not because I have to, but because I can't help it. Habit. The service ends, but the routines remain, like limbs you can't amputate. I sit on the edge of the bed. The mattress creaks slightly beneath me. Diana's breathing is calm beside me. I look at her in the half-light. Her face is peaceful, like nothing in the world could ever disturb that balance. Strange. Just a few years ago, I was certain I was her world. I get up, careful not to wake her. Quiet steps carry me to the bathroom. Cold water hits harder than any caffeine. The mirror reflects a face I barely recognize. The real scars aren't on the outside. They're buried deep. Downstairs, my footsteps echo softly on the wooden floor. The window above the sink is fogged from morning dew. Outside, it's the picture-perfect suburb, neatly trimmed lawns, clean sidewalks, the neighbor's dog barking at the same time every morning. It's all a stage. I switch on the coffee maker. The machine hums, filling the kitchen with the only sound that matters. I watch as drops of hot black coffee slowly fill the cup. This is my ritual. Simple. Like a soldier's manual. Wake up, drink, begin. Half an hour later, Diana walks in. She lightly adjusts her hair, a sleepy smile on her lips. "You didn't sleep again, did you?" she asks, pouring herself a cup. "I'm fine," I reply, keeping it short. She's used to that. We sit at the table. In silence. I used to think this was the comfortable quiet between two people who understood each other without words. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe it's just the silence between two strangers. A newspaper lies on the table. I flip through it out of habit. Economy updates, sports results, another politician caught in corruption. The world spins as usual. And I just watch. Soon, Sophie appears, our daughter. She's like a beam of sunlight that hasn't yet realized there's a storm brewing outside. Her eyes shine. She wears a simple dress that gently hugs her pregnant belly. "Morning, Dad," she says, kissing my cheek as she sits next to me. "Morning, sunshine. How are you?" "Wonderful." The baby's kicking like he's training for a marathon. We laugh. And for a moment, it feels real. Then Alex walks in. The perfect son-in-law, bright smile, spotless shirt, a faint trace of expensive cologne. He walks over to Sophie, kisses her on the forehead, then nods at me. "Morning, Robert." "Morning." He always calls me by name. Never Dad or anything like that. It's a small thing, but it leaves a bitter taste. In the army, I learned how to read people by their gestures, their eyes, their voice. And something about Alex feels off. They say cracks in the glass don't show up all at once. First, it's just a hairline fracture, thin as a strand of hair. Barely visible. But one day, you look at it from a different angle and you realize the glass has been shattered for a long time. You just didn't want to see it. I started to notice. At first, it was the little things. It always starts with the little things. Diana began coming home later. Client meeting ran long. Stopped by a friend's place after work. Got held up at the gym. The explanations sounded routine. Like that's just how life goes. But her voice, it was different. Not fake. No. Too calm. Too lifeless. Like a soldier reciting orders. I watched. Didn't ask. Just remembered. One evening, I came home earlier than usual and saw her quickly slip her phone into her purse. Like it was instinct. Like she didn't want me to see what was on the screen. "Who called?" I asked casually, not looking at her. She flinched. Just a little. "Huh?" "No one. Just spam." I nodded. Just nodded. But something twisted inside me. Not because of the call, but because of how easily she lied. Alex changed too. He used to laugh loud, crack awkward jokes, try too hard to be liked. Now he was more restrained, but not because he'd matured. His smile felt rehearsed. Like he was putting it on, like a suit. He started coming home late. Said it was work. Sometimes he smelled like a perfume that wasn't his. One thing I learned from my time in the service. The real threat never looks threatening. It smiles. One evening, I stepped into the study, a forgotten corner of the house where I kept old files, journals, photos from my military days. Diana's phone was on the desk. Unlocked. That almost never happened. Almost never. I didn't want to. I told myself, don't do it. But my hand had already moved. The messages were ordinary. Just everyday conversations. But too clean. Like someone had carefully scrubbed the trail. Only one text stood out. No name. Just a number. Tonight? I placed the phone back down. My heartbeat thudded, low and steady, like a war drum before a fight. The next day, I decided to follow Alex. Not like a jealous husband. Like a scout tracking his target. He left the office later than usual, but didn't head home. I stayed back, keeping a safe distance. I knew how not to be seen. Alex drove to a small bar on the edge of town. Met someone. I couldn't see the other person's face, just a shadow. They spoke quietly. Too serious for friends. Too cautious for coworkers. Half an hour later, Alex left. I sat in my car, staring at the spot where they had stood, and something twisted inside my chest. It wasn't jealousy. It was something bigger. Back home, Diana stood in the kitchen, slicing vegetables for dinner, smiling into the empty space in front of her. I watched her. For too long. What? She asked, without looking up. Just thinking how fast time flies. She smiled. Yeah, before you know it, everything changes. I gave a half smile. You don't notice. Not until it's too late. They say the loudest explosions happen in silence. No siren. No countdown. Just a click inside you, and your reality shatters. That night, it began with silence. I woke up because something felt wrong. Not a sound. Not a light. Just an emptiness beside me. The cold sheet. The twisted blanket. And the air heavier somehow. The clock said 2:47. Diana was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The house was still. But not the comforting stillness I was used to. This was the silence that hides before a storm. The kind of silence even the walls feel. I stood up. Slowly. Every movement strung tight like a pulled wire. I passed Sophie's empty room. The hallway light cast long shadows that made everything worse. A step creaked on the stairs, soft enough only I would notice. A light was on downstairs. The kitchen. And they were there. Diana and Alex. They didn't even hear me come in. She was sitting on the counter, head tilted back slightly. His arms were wrapped around her, like a serpent. Their breathing was in sync, like they had practiced it 1,000 times. I froze in the doorway. My mind refused to accept what my eyes saw. Maybe it was a dream. Maybe the blood in my veins was lying to me. But no, it was real. He was with my wife, the husband of my daughter. Everything inside me locked up. Not anger. Something worse. Emptiness. Black, freezing emptiness that spread through my veins, drowning every last piece of reason. I didn't think. I moved. What the hell is this? The words ripped out of me, loud and sharp like a gunshot. Diana flinched and turned. Her eyes fear. Not guilt. Fear. Alex backed away like I had thrown boiling water at him. Robert, this isn't, he began. I didn't let him finish. I lunged forward, and my fist crashed into his face. Square on the cheekbone. I felt the crack under his skin. He collapsed, but I didn't stop. Hits. One after another. To his jaw, his nose, his ribs. He tried to push back. Grabbed my arms, weakly. It was pathetic. I hit harder. Every strike felt like it was undoing a year of lies. Robert, stop. Diana tried to grab my shoulder, but I shoved her away. She hit the floor. Alex groaned, trying to crawl backward. I grabbed him by the hair, yanked his head up, and stared into his blood-covered face. You thought you could sleep with my wife and walk away? I growled. He tried to smirk through the blood. Maybe, if you'd been more of a man, she wouldn't have looked elsewhere. Click. Something inside snapped. I hit him with everything I had. His head slammed back onto the floor. Then, a creak on the stairs. So faint. But I heard it. Sophie. She stood at the top step, wearing her nightgown. Hair messy. Face pale. Her eyes bounced between me. Diana and Alex, choking on his own blood. Dad, what's happening? Her voice trembled like a pulled string ready to snap. I turned to her, and everything inside me tightened. Blood on my hands. On the floor. On me. The truth was here in this room. Like a blade lodged straight in the chest. I looked at her and said, Your husband is sleeping with your mother. That's what's happening. The words hit like a punch. She went pale. Her lips trembled. What? She whispered, stepping back. You heard me. That coward is sleeping with your mother. In our kitchen. Diana stood up, shaking. Robert, stop. Please don't. I looked at her. Don't what? Don't speak the truth? Or don't hit the man you gave more to than your own family. Sophie covered her mouth with both hands. Tears poured down her cheeks. She took another step back and lost her balance. A dull thud. Diana screamed and rushed to her. I stayed where I was. Just stared at them. Like strangers. That night, I understood something. The enemy isn't always the one pulling a trigger on the battlefield. Sometimes, the enemy shares your bed. Hospitals smell like death. Not antiseptic. Not clean sheets. Death. It hides in the corners, between white walls and cold floors. It clings to your skin like a shadow you can't wash away. I sat on a plastic chair, hands resting on my knees, my eyes locked on a single crack in the wall's paint. A white fracture. Like a crack in glass. Like a crack in my life. In front of me, a doctor, young, worn out, with eyes of a man who's seen too much. He was talking, his lips moving, but the sounds didn't reach me. I could only hear a dull hum, like the echo after an explosion. And then one sentence cut through the silence like a blade. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save the baby. Sophie broke down, sobbing. A raw, shattering cry that pierced through the hallway, but I felt no pain. She clutched her belly, as if she could somehow pull back what the darkness had already taken. Her hands shook. Her lips whispered something broken, incomprehensible. Diana sat next to her, tried to comfort her, held her, whispered something, but her voice was just noise. I couldn't hear it. I looked at them like I was watching a scene from a movie. Something distant, detached. I stood, not even realizing it. Just stood and walked down the corridor. White walls pressed in from all sides. People passed me, nurses, doctors. I didn't see their faces. They didn't matter. And then I saw him. Alex. Leaning against the wall. Alive. Breathing. Untouched. After everything, he was still standing. He looked at me. Eyes red, like he'd been crying. What right did he have to cry? I stopped in front of him. He opened his mouth to say something. Robert, punch. My fist crashed into his face, and he dropped like a rag doll. The sound was sharp. Clean. Real. Like a gunshot. He choked on blood, tried to push himself up. But I was already over him. Punch. For the baby. Punch. For Sophie. Punch. For the years of betrayal. People screamed. Someone tried to pull me away, but I didn't feel their hands. I was a storm, and it was far too late to stop it. Finally, I froze. Looked down at him. His face was a bloody mess. He wheezed, struggling to breathe. I wiped my knuckles clean on his shirt, stood up, and walked away. Never looked back. Outside, it was dark. The air was cold, but I didn't feel it. I got in the car, shut the door, stared out at the empty road ahead. Only one thought in my mind. This isn't over. I started the engine, and in that moment, I realized. The ending had already come that night. This was the beginning of something else. Something unstoppable. Something unforgivable. The night is a strange thing. There's something comforting and terrifying about it all at once. The silence wraps around you, but just beyond every corner. Something watches, breathing in the dark, waiting for you to blink. I came home later than usual. The car rolled through empty streets, headlights catching scraps of pavement and lonely road signs, useless in a dead city. The house stood dark. No lights. Just a hollow shell. Diana usually left a light on in the foyer. Not tonight. I shut off the engine. Sat in the car for a few seconds, listening to the quiet. There was a feeling in my chest. Not fear. Something else. Instinct. It never lies. I stepped out of the car. Locked the door behind me. The keys clinked against the metal ring sharp, jarring. Every sound felt louder than it should. Step. Another step. The silence was too perfect. That's when I felt it. The first attacker leapt out from the shadows on the left. Fast, knife in hand, aimed straight at me. But I was faster. A twist of my body, a sharp sidestep, and my hand locked around his wrist. The knife dropped. An elbow struck to his face, his nose cracked with a sickening crunch, followed by a muffled groan. I didn't let him fall. I grabbed him by the collar and drove my elbow into his throat. He collapsed onto the asphalt, choking. The second one came from behind. I felt his breath before he moved. I turned, grabbed his arm, the one holding the gun, and twisted his wrist. A shot fired. Missed. The bullet hit the ground. I drove my knee into his gut, then smashed my forehead into his. His eyes rolled back. I ripped the gun from his hand and fired 2 shots into his chest. No hesitation. Double tap. Just to be sure. The third was smarter. He didn't charge in. I heard the click of a rifle bolt somewhere in the dark. Get down. A bullet zipped past my head. I ducked behind the car, breathing steady, heart beating like a clock. This wasn't fear. It was focus. I peeked out. A burst of gunfire from his rifle. Messy, nervous. That was his weakness. I circled around the car low and silent. He was still waiting for me to pop out from the same spot. A second later, I was already behind him. He fired, missed, tried to reload. Too late. I struck him across the face with the butt of the rifle. He dropped, scrambling to recover. A kick to his gut. He choked, his weapon slipping from his hands. Who sent you? I growled, slamming his face into the pavement. He spat blood, tried to speak. I didn't give him the chance. Click. Bang. Silence returned. I searched the bodies. Phones, wallets, no IDs. One of them had a cracked smartphone. I turned it on. No password. Fool. In the gallery. Photos. Of my family. Diana. Sophie. Our house. Me. Leaving in the morning. Each picture felt like a bullet between the eyes. They'd been watching us. For a long time. And then something else. Messages. Encrypted. Except one. Target confirmed. Next phase. I stared at the screen. What rose inside me wasn't rage. It was worse. Cold. This wasn't random. Someone was pulling strings. And I was going to find out who. I got into the car. Hands on the wheel. Knuckles bloody. But my heart calm. The game had started. Hospitals or places where time stops. No future. No past. Just a never-ending now filled with antiseptic, cold sheets, and whispers louder than screams. I came back in the morning. Not because I wanted to. Because I had to. Sophie was lying in the hospital bed, surrounded by tubes and machines that beeped with cold precision. Her face pale. Lips cracked. A fine sheen of sweat on her forehead. But she was alive. And so was the baby. Doctors called it a miracle. I don't believe in miracles. It was her strength. Sophie had always been tougher than she looked. I sat beside her. Said nothing for a long time. My hands curled into fists. But my face stayed still. A mask. Stone. Not for me. For her. Her eyes fluttered open. Unfocused. Searching. Then they found me. Dad, she whispered. Her voice was barely a breath. I leaned in, placed my hand gently over hers. I'm here. Just that. No drama. No emotion. Like an anchor in the storm. She tried to smile, but it looked more like pain. The baby. He's alive. You did it. Her eyes filled with tears, but I squeezed her hand tighter. No tears. Not now. Rest. I'll handle the rest. I left the room and, for the first time in days, let myself breathe. They were still breathing, which meant I could too. But inside, it wasn't over. Pain and fury boiled into something heavier. But I kept it locked down. There was work to do. More important than emotions. Diana and Alex disappeared after that night. I wasn't surprised. Cowards run. Especially when they know I'm coming. But they never had a chance. I started with the basics. Traced their accounts and recent transactions. Recalled every place Diana ever felt safe. Reached out to old army contacts, people who still owed me. And of course, they were found. A cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. Low profile. Quiet. To them, a hiding place. To me, a trap. But I didn't go right away. First, I went back to the hospital. To Sophie. I sat beside her, watching her breathe. She opened her eyes again. You found them? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Are you going to kill them? I didn't answer right away. I ran my finger across her palm. As if I could wipe away what they'd done. I'll do what has to be done. She nodded. No more questions. She understood. That was enough. That night, I returned to the empty apartment. Silence helps you think. I pulled out the phone from the man I shot outside. Messages. Codes. Photos of my family. And addresses. This was more than betrayal. It was part of something bigger. Someone had been watching me for a long time. And now, I was going to find out who. I stared at a photo of Sophie on the phone. Smiling. Happy. She'd never look like that again. They broke her. But they didn't break me. I turned off the light. Tomorrow, the hunt begins. The night became my only ally again. That same darkness I used to hate for its silence now felt familiar, like a blanket I could disappear beneath. It didn't ask questions. It didn't try to comfort me. It just was. like an old friend who already knew every one of my secrets. The city slept, but inside me, there was no rest. Something pulsed under my ribs. Not rage. Rage burns fast and dies even faster. This was different. Heavier. Thicker. Like soot coating the soul, impossible to wash off, impossible to forget. Sometimes, revenge isn't a burst of fury. It's silence. Long, suffocating silence where only one thing remains. Cold calculation. I didn't feel rage when I stood in front of Alex. I felt emptiness. And that emptiness was far more dangerous. Catching him was easier than I expected. He tried to leave town, thinking time and distance could shield him. But people like him, they don't know how to vanish. They always leave a trail. Always. I tracked him methodically, like prepping gear before a mission. No rush. No emotion. I found him holed up in a cheap motel on the outskirts. Soaked in fear, desperate to disappear into it. He opened the door but didn't have time to speak. One strike to his ribs with the stock of my rifle. He folded like paper. I tied his wrists and ankles with plastic restraints, pulled them tight until he hissed from the pain. "It's time we had a talk, Alex," I said quietly, like I was commenting on the weather. The place I chose was perfect. An old industrial hangar miles from town, abandoned for years. Parts of the roof had caved in. Moonlight slipped through rusted beams, drawing long shadows across cracked concrete. The air smelled of rust, dust, and rot. The scent of forgotten places, the kind no one visits anymore. I dragged him in from the trunk like a bag of garbage, ignoring his sobs and desperate pleas. No one would hear him out here. No one would come. Inside, I could be who I truly was. I tied his hands to thick metal beams, arms spread wide, body hanging under its own weight. The ropes cut into his skin, carving red lines that would soon turn into something deeper. His legs I strapped to opposite corners, stretching him like a broken marionette. Now he was where he belonged. Hanging. Helpless. Pathetic. "Robert, please," he croaked, searching for anything to say. I stepped closer. His eyes were full of fear. The kind I'd waited to see. "You once said this wasn't personal," I said, my voice calm, almost amused. "But for me, it's very personal." I pulled out a knife. Didn't rush. Slowly dragged the blade across his chest. A thin red line opened, warm blood rising to the surface. He winced. Muscles tensed. But the ropes gave him no room to move. "You destroyed my family. You really thought you could just walk away." My tone stayed even. Like we were just talking over coffee. He stammered something gibberish. Words didn't matter anymore. I tightened the ropes. His body stretched further. Tendons strained. Muscles popped. He screamed. And that scream. It was right. I leaned in. "Did you know pain isn't just something you feel? Real pain is knowing. No one's coming to save you." I twisted the ropes tighter. Slowly. Deliberately. He screamed again. Begged. Promised things. But I didn't hear his voice. Only the drumbeat in my ears. Steady. Relentless. Like the march to war. His shoulder cracked first. Dislocated. His cry turned into a gurgled wheeze. I looked into his eyes. Gone was the arrogance. Gone was the smirk. Only terror remained. Then, the tendons in his legs snapped. His voice broke into silence. He couldn't scream anymore. Only gasp. I took my time. Every second stretched into eternity. I wanted him to feel it. Every torn fiber of his body. When the ropes were taut to the limit, I stepped closer. His face, barely conscious. Lips bloody. Eyes rolling. I placed the knife against his throat. Slow. Precise. Like putting the final period on the last page of a story. The blood came fast. Hot. But he didn't even have the strength to cry out. Only a choking sound. Then nothing. I stood there. Watching. Waiting. Until his chest stopped rising. Until he was just gone. Just a slab of meat. Nothing more. Nothing less. I wiped my hands. Put the knife away. Turned back to the shadowed hangar where his body still hung. A warning to anyone who ever thought they could break someone like me. But inside, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No peace. Only silence. Alex's blood hadn't even cooled when I stepped out of the hangar. The night greeted me with the same indifferent silence, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. Not out there. Inside. I thought revenge would bring relief. I was wrong. The emptiness remained. It pressed in from the inside. But now, pulsing at its core, there was something new. A shadow. A question. The one Alex left me with. Even after his heart stopped beating. "You're part of the program." Those words hit harder than any bullet. They stuck in my mind, repeating like an echo you can't escape. I returned to the motel where I'd found him. The room still smelled like cheap deodorant and fear. An open bottle of whiskey on the table. Empty glass. A cigarette burned down to the filter. I started searching. Methodically. Deliberately. Like a mission, knowing the answer was hidden in the details. First clue. A laptop. Stuffed under the mattress. Cheap model. Military-grade encryption. Not a problem. I knew how to break into ghosts. Memory is the sharpest weapon. But that wasn't all. Inside the closet. A worn-out military backpack. Heavy. I opened it. And realized Alex wasn't just a pawn. Documents. Folders marked with stamps, some scrubbed clean. But I recognized the codes. Black Ops. Buried orders. Some with my name on them. Operations I hadn't thought about in years. Missions I believed were buried with the men who carried them out. But that wasn't the worst part. Tucked inside the papers. Photographs. Not from combat. From my life. Diana. Sophie. Me. In our quiet, suburban world. On the back of several photos. Numbers. Codes. Dates. And one date I knew too well. The day I met Diana. The air left my lungs. She was part of it. Not just the betrayal. Not just the affair. Planned. I sat on the floor. Laid out the files around me. My brain shifted into autopilot. Piecing together fragments into a chilling picture. Reports. Psych evaluations. Assessments. Of me. Subject X 17. That was me. I read the pages, unable to believe what I saw. Observing stress response patterns. Testing emotional resilience thresholds. Scenario 3. Family integration for deep control. My life. It wasn't mine. It was an experiment. Diana? A controlled variable. Alex? An engineered catalyst. Sophie? Collateral damage. The last page bore a seal. Red. Sharp. Unmistakable. Protocol. Not just a program. A global network. They weren't creating spies or soldiers. They were shaping people. Designing lives like chess masters place pawns. And I was one of them. A piece on their board. My fist clenched so tightly, my nails cut through skin. Blood dripped onto the documents. The final signature on a verdict. But now, I knew the truth. And that truth was the beginning of their end. I gathered every file. Packed the backpack. Left the room without looking back. The street outside was quiet. But inside me, a storm had awakened. Protocol thought I was just an asset. But they forgot one thing. I'm not a pawn. I'm the hunter. The house welcomed me with the same silence I had left behind. Silence always knows. It doesn't need to ask. It doesn't care about reasons. It simply fills the space where everything important used to live. I stood at the door, keys in my hand. Fingers gripped the metal until my knuckles turned white. A deep breath. An ordinary house. An ordinary door. But beyond it, a lie that had grown like rust through steel, creeping into every crack of my life. I unlocked it. No sound. No rush. Inside spotless. Too spotless. Like someone had tried to clean everything. But forgot that the stench of betrayal doesn't wash off with soap. Diana was in the kitchen. Sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, calm as ever. Cold. Collected. Like nothing had happened. She looked up. Something flickered in her eyes. Not fear. Recognition. She knew I knew. I stepped closer. Slow. Measured. Each footstep echoed in my head. Like the final countdown. We didn't speak. There was no need. Everything had already been said, without words. I just looked at her. And she held my gaze. But I saw it. The tremble in her fingers as they rested on the cup. Small. Barely noticeable. Not fear of death. Fear of what comes next. And I wasn't going to kill her. Death would have been too easy. Revenge is an art form. It should be slow, like a toxin that seeps into the bloodstream, breaking a person from the inside out. I wanted her to feel every second of her betrayal. To live in a life as hollow as the one she left me with. I leaned in, lips just a breath from her ear. You knew. I whispered quieter than a heartbeat. She didn't answer. She couldn't. I straightened, gave her one last look, and walked away. No turning back. Sophie. I went straight to her after. The hospital welcomed me with that familiar scent of antiseptic, machines humming in steady rhythm. But this time something was different. Warmth. Not in the air. Inside me. Sophie lay in the hospital bed, pale, but alive. When she turned her head and saw me, a faint smile flickered in her eyes. Not joy. It was fractured, like glass barely holding together. I sat beside her, said nothing, just took her hand in mine. Warm, fragile. I felt her fingers gently tighten around mine. Are you okay? She asked softly, her voice frail, but with a note of hope. I will be, I said simply. We sat in silence. Sometimes, words are too much. Sometimes, just being there is enough. I stroked her hand, the way I did when she was little. When nightmares woke her in the middle of the night. Back then, it helped her sleep. Now, it helped me breathe. I told her something small, something unimportant, about the weather, about the time she learned to ride a bike and kept falling, only to get back up again. She listened, and light returned to her eyes. Small, but real. I was her rock, and that's how it always should have been. When I stepped outside, the sky was fading into twilight. The wind slipped beneath my collar, but I didn't feel the cold. Inside, something burned. The warmth of rage. Diana thought I'd leave her alone? No. I'd be back. Not to end her life, but to show her what it truly means to lose everything you ever believed in. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her personal hell. Revenge isn't just payment for pain. It's the architecture of ruin. Not a flash of anger, but careful work, where every move is a piece of a larger design. Killing is too simple. It brings quick relief and quicker forgetfulness. I wanted more. I wanted Diana to live, to remember every second of what I did to her. Step 1. Take her money. I knew where to look. Years by her side taught me her habits better than she ever realized. Accounts, hidden funds, offshore transfers. I found them all, and I didn't just drain them. I made them vanish like smoke. No money, no freedom. When her card stopped working, she probably thought it was a bank error. When she couldn't pay rent, panic crept in. When she was denied a new loan, fear took root. Fear, the first nail in the coffin of her peace. Step 2. Ruin her reputation. I sent anonymous letters to her coworkers, her business partners. Inside, documents she'd buried for years. Schemes, fraud, financial manipulation. All there. The truth, blended with just enough lies to blur the line. It didn't matter what was real. What mattered was what people believed. The company she built her life around turned its back on her before she even realized what was happening. She was dismissed without appeal. From a powerful businesswoman to a liability no one wanted to be near. Step 3. Steal her peace of mind. I wanted her to feel me near. Always. I sent her flowers. White lilies. The kind you see at funerals. No note. No sender. Just flowers. Sometimes, I called her from blocked numbers and said nothing. Other times, I left subtle signs in her apartment. A chair slightly moved. A window open. A door closed the wrong way. Nothing she could prove, but enough to make her question everything. Paranoia is the best poison. It works slow. It digs deep. Turns every shadow into a threat. I watched her fall. She moved to a tiny apartment in a dirty neighborhood. Her hair, unkempt. Her face, drawn, exhausted. No more tailored suits. No more arrogance in her eyes. She feared her own reflection, as she should. But I wasn't there to finish her. I wanted her to live. She lived, and remembered that her world hadn't collapsed on its own. I was the architect of her destruction, and through it all, I stayed by Sophie's side. She was healing, slowly but steadily, and I cared for her the way I always should have. Made her breakfast, brought her flowers to the hospital, read her favorite books out loud, just to see her smile. I never showed pain. I was the rock, the one she could lean on. Sometimes she'd ask about Diana. I'd answer simply, she's alive. That was all Sophie needed to know. If one day she chose to find her, so be it. But she wouldn't be finding the Diana she remembered. She'd find a ghost. A fragment of a woman who once believed she was strong. I stood on the rooftop across from Diana's new apartment. Down below, she walked along the street, shoulders hunched, wearing a cheap jacket. I watched her and felt nothing. Not hate, not satisfaction, just emptiness. And that was enough. Time doesn't heal. It just makes wounds less visible. Turns them into scars. Scars don't hurt, but you never forget they're there. Months passed. The city met spring quietly, without fanfare. That same dull, gray backdrop I once thought mirrored my own hollow life. But now, there was something else. Expectation. I stood by the hospital window. Same smell of antiseptic. Same pale walls. same steady hum of machines. But today wasn't about pain. Today was about hope. In the room next door, Sophie was giving birth. I heard her cries ragged, raw, and something inside me clenched tight. Not fear, not worry, just life. And in that moment, I was right back where I'd been years ago. The first time I held that tiny bundle with a scrunched-up face and clenched fists. My daughter. Back then, I thought the world had paused, just to mark that moment. And now, it happened again. The doctor stepped out of the delivery room, mask pulled down. On his face, that exhausted, but unmistakably genuine smile I'd only seen in two situations. When everything went right. Or when it was all over. Congratulations. You have a grandson. I froze. The words moved slowly through my mind. Like my brain didn't want to accept them too fast, afraid it might be some cruel mistake. Grandson. I walked into the room. Sophie lay in bed, pale, but smiling. And in her arms, a tiny bundle. Life. New life. I stepped closer. She looked up at me, eyes filled with exhaustion and something more. Joy. Dad, meet him. I took the baby in my arms. He was so small, warm. His tiny fists clenched, his face already carrying that serious, slightly disapproving expression. Like he'd already seen too much of the world. I smiled. Hey, little man. And something inside clicked. Not pain. Not emptiness. Warmth. Real. Pure. I sat beside Sophie, holding him close. Watched him breathe. Watched those tiny fingers twitch. And I realized everything I'd gone through. Every loss, every scar, every moment I thought had broken me. It was all worth it. I made sure Sophie would never have to worry again. No fears. No shadows over her shoulder. I bought her a house outside the city, where the air smelled like freedom, not metal and dust. A place where she could simply be a mother. No more looking back. Sometimes, I'd sit on the porch with my grandson in my arms, listening to Sophie's laughter echo from the garden. And in those quiet moments, I knew what was broken hadn't been lost. It had just transformed into something new, into life. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hello and welcome to Real Cheating Story. October 1st was the day my life, as I knew it, changed forever. I'm not a rocket scientist by any means, but I do know this. If you're doing something wrong, you keep doing it, and you want to keep it a secret from certain people, you are attempting the impossible. My loving, beautiful, and unfaithful wife has yet to figure that out. Unfortunately, I have. My name is Tom Carter, and I'm married to Evelyn. Though for nearly 15 years, I called her Evie. We have two wonderful children. Catherine Kate, for short, was born first, weighing almost 7 pounds, and 2 years later, our son, Tom Jr., arrived a hefty 9 pounds. Evelyn and I have had a good life together. We married young, deeply in love, swearing we'd grow old side by side. We worked hard to keep our love strong, and for the longest time, it seemed to work. Sure, there were a few rough patches over the years, but each time, we managed to push through, and it felt like our marriage only grew stronger. My wife is a beautiful woman, not in a pageant-perfect way, but with a kind of beauty that radiates from within. She always seemed happy with life, with herself. People assume I have a tough job. I work in upper management for a company that sells a variety of products. I love my job, and I enjoy the people I work with. I spent years building my team, and now, most of the time, I simply oversee things while they do the heavy lifting. Occasionally, I step out of my office and walk the floor just to keep everyone on their toes. Every now and then, I take an impromptu break to browse used bookstores. I guess I just admitted my guilty pleasure. I love to read. Mysteries, westerns, science fiction, even the occasional romance novel if it catches my eye. The only problem with my job? Sometimes, I have too much time on my hands. Since it wouldn't look great to sit at my desk reading a paperback, I often just sit and think. Most of it is idle, nothing urgent or important. But today, as I sit in my office, staring out the window, I'm not really seeing anything at all. Evelyn and I have hit another rough patch. Recently, she informed me, rather coldly, that she no longer wanted me to call her Evie. She insisted I address her by her full name from now on. Maybe that wouldn't have been so bad on its own, but what followed caught me so off guard that I laughed. That was a mistake. My sweet, loving wife went from calm to furious in an instant. She started yelling, throwing every insult she could think of my way. You take me for granted. You never appreciate anything I do. Her face was flushed with anger, and I could see she was on the verge of saying something she'd regret. Instead, she just glared at me. Tom, you never stop being impossible. She spun around and left the room, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I was stunned, hurt. The bitterness in her voice stung like poison. That night, I had no desire to share a bed with her. I slept restlessly on the couch. In the morning, I got up early, showered, dressed, and left for work before she even came out of the bedroom. Later that morning, my secretary, Alice, informed me that my wife was on the line. Honestly, I wasn't feeling particularly warm toward her at that moment, so my greeting was brief and cold. Hello. That was it. Nothing else. I was still upset about our argument. Good morning, Tom, she said cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. I could hear the lightness in her voice. I'm going to join some of the girls from work for a few drinks at this little place they've been telling me about for a while. I shouldn't be too late, but I won't have dinner ready for you. The bitterness rising in my throat made it hard to respond, so I said nothing at all. Tom, did you hear me? Now I could hear the irritation in her voice. This was becoming far too common in our conversations. Lately, it seemed that no matter what I said or didn't say, it was never quite right in her eyes. I heard you, and since you didn't stutter much, I even managed to understand you. I hope she caught the sarcasm in my voice. The more we talked, the angrier I became, and at that moment, I was more than ready for an argument. Well, good. I was afraid you weren't paying attention again. See you later tonight. And just like that, she hung up without another word, leaving me to stew in my own frustration. This was where I always fell short in arguments with her. Only after the conversation was over did I think of all the things I should have said. Things like, well, you certainly aren't asking for my opinion, so why even bother telling me? Or, if you're asking for permission, do me a favor and stay out as late as you want, since you've been such delightful company lately. The fact that I never seemed to win an argument with my wife had always been a sore spot for me. The only way I ever got my way was by simply outlasting her stubbornness. But that only worked for things important enough to me, things I was willing to endure the inevitable cold shoulder and icy silence for. A perfect example? The time we went shopping for a recliner. I had narrowed my choices down to two, but she didn't like either one. Instead of considering my preferences, she kept trying to steer me towards something she wanted. Eventually, frustration took over. This chair is supposed to be for me, I had said. If I can't have what I want, then I don't want anything at all. Without waiting for a response, I walked out of the store and sat in the car. When she finally came out, she was furious, angry that I had embarrassed her in the store, and even angrier that she hadn't gotten her way. For the next 2 weeks, I endured her cold shoulder and sharp remarks. Then, as if by magic, one of the chairs I had picked out appeared in our living room. Eventually, she got over it, just like she always did. Sometimes getting my way was painful, but in my mind it was worth it. I finally pushed my irritation aside and got back to work, grateful for something to focus on. A real issue needed my attention, and before I knew it, the afternoon had flown by. I had almost managed to forget about Evelyn and her attitude, until my secretary, Alice, reminded me that I was the head chef and bottle washer for the evening. If my kids wanted dinner, I need to get home soon. I made it home in good time, and the kids were thrilled to see me. They were even happier when I told them we were going out for dinner. We had a fantastic evening together. Even though it was a school night, I decided to take them to one of those theaters that serves food during the movie. We watched a great Disney film while they enjoyed pizza. I love my children more than anything. By the time we got home, they were exhausted and ready for bed. As I tucked them in, I couldn't stop smiling. Spending time with them reminded me of what truly mattered. If it ever came down to it, I would do anything to protect them. Feeling tired myself, I was just about to turn in for the night when Evelyn walked through the door. "I'm home," she sang. Wow, she's in a really good mood, I thought. Seeing her like that gave me hope for a warm welcome. "Did you have a good time?" Evelyn stopped in the doorway and smiled. "Yes, I really enjoyed getting out. We all had a good time just chatting and catching up. Then, without another word about her night out, she added, "I'm exhausted. I need a shower to get the smell of smoke out of my hair, and then am heading straight to bed." As I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but notice that she hadn't shown the slightest interest in my evening or the kids. No hug, no kiss goodnight, not even a casual "how was your night?" The expressions of love and affection that had once been so natural between us had now become rare. I sat there, trying to pinpoint exactly when my wife had become so distant, so self-absorbed. I spent another couple of hours wrestling with the thoughts of how much her behavior was affecting our marriage. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and because of it, I was more irritable than usual in the morning. The kids didn't seem to notice. They were too busy getting their breakfast and rushing out the door for school. I was still sitting at the table, nursing my second cup of coffee, when Evelyn finally came downstairs. It was obvious she was still in a great mood. She hummed and sang softly to herself as she prepared her breakfast, completely oblivious to my sour expression. Her cheerfulness grated on my nerves. "Well, good morning," she chirped. I didn't respond, just took a slow sip of my coffee and stared at her over the rim of my cup. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong with you? What put you in such a foul mood?" I took an unreasonable amount of satisfaction in the frown that crossed her face. At that moment, I would have given anything just to silence her. All I knew was that I was sick and tired of the way she had been treating me for far too long. I didn't even bother to answer. Instead, I got up, walked to the sink, and placed my cup inside. "Well, you certainly know how to ruin a good mood," she snapped. I couldn't help myself. For the first time in our marriage, I just had to say it. "Since when does my mood have to match yours?" I shot back. "And just so you know, I'm just as happy to see you this morning as you were to see me when you finally came home last night." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her throat. But I didn't care about hurting her feelings. I was too tired of always being the one left on the losing end in this relationship. Grabbing my car keys, I walked to the door, flinging one last remark over my shoulder. "Thank you so much, dear. Hope you have a wonderful day." I must have really stunned her, because I was already backing out of the driveway when she came storming out the door. "Tom, get back in here this minute," she shouted. "You walk away from me right now, and you will regret it." I figured things between us were already bad enough. What more could she do? So I just waved at her as I drove off. And you know what? Suddenly, my bad mood lifted. I couldn't remember the last time I'd had the final word with Evelyn. By the time I got to work, my good mood was obvious to everyone. I smiled and greeted nearly everyone I passed on the way to my office. The thought struck me, was it possible that standing up for myself just once was the reason I felt this good? I got busy with the day's work, and for the most part, forgot all about my parting words to my wife. That evening, when I arrived home, the first thing I saw was Evelyn. She was standing in the middle of the kitchen, arms crossed, foot tapping furiously. Her lips were pressed into a tight, angry line, and her eyes practically burned with frustration. It was obvious she was ready for a fight, but she wanted me to speak first. This was one of her favorite tactics. It usually made me feel guilty and eager to apologize. Not this time. I simply smiled at her, walked past without a word, and left the room. I was in the bedroom changing clothes when she stomped in. "Don't you have anything to say to me?" Her tone was sharp, demanding. "No." I figured this was a good time to be a man of few words. I also figured I'd be better off making myself scarce. Without another word, I went down to the basement, my only real safe space. Evelyn hated the basement and never came down for any reason. I stayed there so long that I ended up dozing off in an old, overstuffed chair I had dragged down there years ago. When I woke up around 2 a.m., I finally went upstairs to bed. The next morning, it was Evelyn's turn to get the kids off to school, so I got up early and left the house as soon as I was dressed. I didn't think she even realized I was gone. I stopped at a nearby Denny's and had a big breakfast, enjoying the quiet. When I got to work, my assistant Alice handed me my first message of the day. "It's from Evelyn," she said. "It just says, 'Call me.'" I raised an eyebrow. "Just that?" "Well," Alice smirked. "Let's just say I gave you the short, edited version. I could easily fill in the blanks." I had no doubt Evelyn was still furious. I grinned at Alice, and she grinned back when I told her to hold all of my wife's calls. "If she asks, I'm either out of the office or in a meeting for the rest of the day. That day turned out to be unusually slow. My staff was busy working on various tasks, and none of them needed my input. By 3 p.m., I decided to leave early. A casual acquaintance had once mentioned a used bookstore on the other side of town, a place I rarely visited. He had also told me the bookstore had an excellent cafe where I could grab a meal and read. That sounded exactly like what I needed. I let Alice know that I'd be available by cell phone if anyone needed me, but otherwise, I was done for the day. It was Friday, and Evelyn's parents had already planned to pick up the kids from school and keep them for the weekend. I had no idea what plans my wife might have made, but at that moment, I didn't particularly care. I was still too annoyed with her to give it much thought. I had just settled in at the bookstore cafe with a book and a sandwich when my phone buzzed. Alice. She had another message from Evelyn. She said she'll be working late and then going out again with her co-workers. She doesn't know when she'll be home. Alice hesitated, then added, I think she's still pretty mad at you. I shrugged, putting on my best fake British accent. No witties. I'm quite comfortable here with a good book. Alice laughed. I told her to have a great weekend and that I'd see her Monday morning. About an hour later, I happened to glance up, and that's when I saw it. Evelyn's car pulled up and parked across the street. At first, I was only mildly curious as I watched her step onto the sidewalk. But then, a second car pulled up beside hers. A young man, maybe 30 or so, got out and approached her. And then, right there, in broad daylight, he pulled her into a very affectionate hug, and then an even more intimate kiss. Time seemed to stop. My mind went blank. A strange, uncomfortable sensation spread through me, like ice in my veins. I watched as they linked arms and walked into the small bar in front of them. It took several moments before I could form a coherent thought. Well, that just happened. If you had asked me 30 seconds ago, I would have bet my life that what I had just witnessed was impossible. My sweet, devoted wife would never, in a million years, do something like this. I had no idea what to do. I was completely stunned by what I had witnessed. I just sat there frozen like a statue, unable to move or even process what had just happened. Maybe half an hour later, they walked out of the bar together, still close, still looking completely at ease with each other. I watched as they got into the man's car, and then he drove off with her. I had no idea how long I sat there after that, barely breathing, staring at the empty space where her car had been. I only realized I had been holding my breath when my chest suddenly ached, and I gasped for air. The pain I was feeling was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. I had just watched my marriage die, and there was nothing I could do to save it. At some point, I got up, leaving my book behind, and walked out of the bookstore. My mind was completely numb, but my heart felt like it had been torn apart. I had loved my wife almost from the moment we met. And now all I could think about was how unbearable life was going to be without her. The street was quiet. There was no one around. I glanced at her abandoned car, sitting there like an insult. Without really thinking, I walked over, pulled out my small but very sharp pocket knife, and one by one, punctured the valve stems on all 4 tires. Then, without looking back, I got into my own car and drove away. I didn't have anywhere to go. For most of my adult life, I had been completely devoted to my wife and children. I had no close friends I felt comfortable confiding in, no one I could call and say, hey, my wife just tore my heart out, what should I do? So, I simply went home. I went straight to the basement and collapsed into my old, worn-out chair. For hours, I just sat there staring into the darkness, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I made and discarded dozens of plans, each one leading to nothing. I couldn't decide what to do. And that was exactly how Evelyn found me when she finally came home at around 10 p.m. I was surprised to look up and see her standing at the top of the basement stairs, looking down at me. I honestly couldn't remember the last time she had come even this far into the basement. I kept it clean, but it was cluttered, and she had always avoided it like the plague. I looked up at her. She was in a good mood again. No, that wasn't the right word. She looked relaxed. She had that loose, easy posture, the kind of body language people have when they're completely at peace. Well, isn't that nice? Hey, honey, she said, her voice light and casual. Did you get my message at work? I tried to call a few times, but you were always out or in a meeting. Good old Alice, I thought. I was suddenly very, very grateful to my assistant for running interference all day. At least something had gone right. Oddly enough, I felt a quiet satisfaction about that, despite the absolute mess my life had just become. I didn't bother answering Evelyn. There wasn't a single thing I could think to say to her that wouldn't make things worse. Because if I opened my mouth, the only words that would come out would be the ones I wasn't ready to say yet. How could you do this to me? Why? I loved you. She stood there, watching me, a slight frown on her face. She didn't mention the vandalism to her car. Of course she couldn't. That would mean admitting where and when it had happened. I decided, right then and there, that the only way to keep myself from completely losing it was to ignore her. If I spoke, I would scream. If I screamed, I wouldn't stop. So, instead, I deliberately turned my head away, fixing my gaze on some random, meaningless corner of the basement. I heard her sigh in irritation. "I don't know what your problem is," she muttered, "but I'm too tired to deal with it tonight. I'm going to bed. You can come or not. I don't really care right now." She turned and walked away. And just like that, she was gone. I could not sleep in the same bed with her. The thought of it, of even being near her, made my stomach twist in a way I couldn't quite describe. The pain just kept growing, getting worse by the second, making it impossible to think straight. So I didn't move. I stayed in that ratty old chair for the rest of the night. I didn't think. I felt. Hours later, I heard her moving around upstairs. The shower turned on, then shut off again a few minutes later. About half an hour after that, I heard her enter the kitchen, and moments later, the scent of coffee and bacon filled the air. For the second time in recent history, Evelyn appeared at the top of the basement stairs. I looked up at her, saying nothing, just staring, desperately trying to keep my emotions from showing on my face. "Do you want any breakfast?" she asked. I knew I couldn't eat. I didn't want to leave what had become my sanctuary. "No, I'm not hungry." Without another word, she turned and walked back to the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard the car start and pull out of the driveway. I remained in my chair, unable to muster the slightest interest in moving. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't thirsty. I felt nothing but exhaustion. The phone rang several times throughout the day, followed by my cell. I didn't answer either. At some point, I must have dozed off because I lost all sense of time. I was startled when I heard the front door open and the familiar chatter of my children as they came home from school. Their excited voices filled the house as they told their mother about their day. Then, the basement door creaked open again. Evelyn stood there, one hand on her hip, watching me with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. "Tom, are you okay? Are you sick or something?" Her voice was so sincere that it made my stomach turn. I leaned over the side of my chair and dry heaved. There was nothing in my stomach, so all that came up was a painful, empty retch. Evelyn tensed but still didn't step down into the basement. Instead, she started talking nervously, hurriedly, muttering something about calling 911 or worse, my mother. That snapped me out of it. Strength suddenly returned to my legs, and I stood up. Without saying a word, I walked past her and climbed the stairs. The moment I stepped into the kitchen, my children's eyes went wide. I must have looked awful. Despite their fear, they rushed toward me, wrapping their arms around me, their small voices full of concern. I knelt down and pulled them close. "Daddy's just not feeling well," I murmured, trying to reassure them. "But I'll be good as new in no time, I promise." I hugged them tightly, letting their warmth anchor me, then stood up and headed for the bedroom without looking back. Once inside, I stripped off my rumpled clothes and padded into the bathroom. I turned on the shower and stepped under the water, letting it run over me, washing away the weight of the last 2 days. For the first time in what felt like forever, my mind began to clear. I stood there for a long time, letting the water soothe me, before finally reaching for the soap and shampoo. When I stepped out and wrapped a towel around myself, I felt different, awake. And then the most painful thought of all surfaced: my children. The idea of losing them, of missing out on their lives, made my chest tighten. Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. I turned away from the mirror, wiping at my face, but before I could fully compose myself, Evelyn walked in. She must have seen my expression because she immediately blurted out, "Tom, Are you crying? Why are you crying? Her voice was a mix of confusion and worry. I cleared my throat, forcing my emotions back down. I'm not crying, I said gruffly. Got soap in my eyes. I was surprised that I could even speak to her without the anger bubbling over. She reached out, as if to take me in her arms, but I stepped back before she could touch me. Instead, I quickly got dressed and left the room. For the rest of the evening, I focused entirely on my children. I played games with Kate and Tom Jr., listening to their stories, laughing at their jokes. And I ignored Evelyn completely. I refused to acknowledge her, wouldn't answer her questions, wouldn't even look at her, except for the brief moments when I caught the concern and fear in her eyes. And for the first time in days, I felt a small, bitter sense of satisfaction. At least now, she was feeling something. Evelyn's story guilt. I just can't seem to shake this awful guilt. My name is Evelyn, and I'm married to a wonderful man named Tom. We have 2 amazing children, and up until a few months ago, I thought we had a perfect marriage. I'm not sure when it started, but I began to feel restless, dissatisfied. At first, I didn't think it was serious. I still love Tom. At least I believed I did. But something had changed. It wasn't about love. It was about liking him. That probably doesn't make much sense, but it's the only way I can describe what I was going through. My feelings for our children never wavered. I adore them. Every moment I spent with them was precious, but they were growing up so fast. Lately, they had become more involved with their friends and school activities, and I found myself with more free time than I was used to. Looking back now, I can see how I began to change, how I started treating Tom differently. I became impatient, snapping at him over small things that had never bothered me before. Suddenly, everything he did seemed irritating. It felt like he was intentionally trying to get on my nerves. But I know now that wasn't true. It was all in my head. It was me. And for some reason, I couldn't stop myself. I started avoiding him. I stayed longer at work, even when I didn't need to. I began stopping by a small local club with some coworkers, having a few drinks, enjoying the music. I even danced with some of the guys there. I won't lie, I liked the attention, but I never let it go too far. No kissing, no holding hands, nothing inappropriate. I was married. I wasn't looking for anything beyond a little fun. At least, that's what I told myself. Tom tried to talk to me. More than once, he told me he felt like we were drifting apart, that the connection we had was fading. I brushed it off, told him he was imagining things. The last time he brought it up, I lost my temper. I snapped. I told him that if he kept pushing the idea, he would make it real just by not letting it go. The look on his face, the hurt, the defeat, only made me angrier. I refused to speak to him for the rest of the evening. That night in bed, I turned my back to him and didn't move an inch. For days, I barely acknowledged him. The only time I acted normal was when the kids were around. When it was just the 2 of us, I didn't even try. I shut him out completely. And then it happened. One morning, he called me by my pet name, Evie. It was something he had always called me, something that once made me feel special. But that day, it made my blood boil. I exploded. I told him that from now on, my name was Evelyn, and I would no longer respond to Evie. I was so angry, so frustrated, that I nearly said something unforgivable, something I knew I could never take back. I almost told him that I didn't know what I had ever seen in him. Somehow, I caught myself before the words came out. But the damage had already been done. I had pushed him too far. Something in him shifted that day. Gone was the patient, loving husband I had always known. He still cared for the children, but with me, he became distant, unconcerned, cold. And then came the morning that changed everything. It started like so many others. I was impatient, irritable, and for the first time, he didn't just take it. His response was so cold, so indifferent, that I was left speechless. By the time I recovered and rushed out the door, he was already driving away. I refused to admit that I had caused this, that my actions had driven him to this point. Instead, I convinced myself that it was his fault. The next several days, I did my best to ignore Tom. I only spoke to him about the children or household matters, nothing more. I started going out with my friends more often after work. When I was with them, my anger and frustration seemed to disappear. Around them, I felt relaxed, free, happy even. That's when Drew, a younger coworker, started paying more attention to me. He was charming, fun, and most of all, interested in me. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't flattered. A younger, attractive man enjoying my company? It felt nice. From that point on, Drew and I spent more time together. At the club, we danced almost exclusively with each other. We even had lunch together a few times. I knew what he wanted, and yet I told myself it was innocent. But when I came home after spending the evening with Drew and my friends, all of the frustration I felt toward Tom would come rushing back. The irritation, the resentment. I could barely stand being in the same room with him. The only thing that kept me from completely losing it was the presence of our children. Then came Friday morning. Tom was distant, just as cold and indifferent as I had been toward him for months. And I hated it. I was furious. That day, he didn't return my calls. He had never done that before. I told myself I didn't care. I convinced myself that I needed some quality time with my friends, and especially with Drew. I never made a conscious decision to cross the line. It just happened. One drink led to another. One dance became something more. I stopped thinking. I just went with the flow. It was one of the most fun, carefree evenings I'd had in a long time. And somehow, it felt inevitable that the night would end the way it did. In a motel room, with Drew. We kissed. We touched. We crossed a line I could never uncross. For a moment, I thought I felt happy. But then, reality hit me like a ton of bricks. I had just betrayed my husband. I had just destroyed my marriage. I couldn't get away fast enough. As soon as I could, I pulled away from Drew and dressed hurriedly. Before walking out that door, I made it clear to him. This was a mistake. A terrible mistake. It will never happen again. And just to be sure he understood, I warned him. If anyone ever found out about what had happened, there would be serious consequences. When Drew dropped me off at my car, I found that someone had vandalized my tires. It took nearly an hour for roadside assistance to fix the problem. After that, I drove aimlessly, trying to process what I had done. The guilt was unbearable. I had broken my vows. And for what? The truth was it hadn't even been worth it. Drew was younger, sure, but there was no real connection. No real passion. Nothing that came close to what I had once shared with Tom. Finally, I turned the car toward home, and something strange happened. The guilt I had felt so intensely just moments before started to fade. By the time I reached my driveway, I barely felt it at all. Instead, I felt relaxed, lighter. For the first time in months, I actually wanted to see my husband. The kids were away for the weekend, and an idea formed in my mind, one I hadn't entertained in a long time. I wanted to be with Tom. I wanted to fix things. But when I stepped inside the house, I couldn't find him anywhere. His car was parked outside, so I knew he had to be home. Finally, I checked the basement. There he was, sitting in silence. He didn't look well at all. I tried to talk to him, to get him to say something, anything, but he just stared at me. His expression was unreadable, but I could feel it. The anger, the pain, the realization made my stomach turn, but I couldn't stop myself from speaking sharply to him. I told myself it was his fault for acting this way, for making me feel guilty. When he still wouldn't respond, I gave up. I turned away and went to shower, trying to wash the tension from my body. By the time I climbed into bed, exhaustion overtook me. Sleep came quickly. The next day was even worse. Tom refused to talk to me. He barely even looked at me, and he still didn't seem well. I tried to ignore the gnawing worry in my stomach, but it was getting harder to push aside. Something was wrong. I had to pick up the children from my mother's house, but before I left, I made a decision. If Tom wasn't any better by the time I got back, I would call his mother. The thought seemed to shake him out of his daze. Almost as if the idea of his mother getting involved gave him a sudden surge of energy, he pulled himself out of that old chair, climbed the stairs, and greeted the kids as if nothing was wrong. He reassured them that he was fine, that he had just been feeling under the weather. Then, without another word to me, he disappeared into the bedroom. Moments later, I heard the shower running. After a while, when I heard the water shut off, I went in to check on him. For a split second, I thought I saw tears in his eyes. But when I opened my mouth to ask if he was okay, He quickly wiped his face and muttered that he had just gotten soap in his eyes. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push. For the rest of the evening, he ignored me completely, focusing all of his attention on the children. The unease in my stomach grew stronger. There was no way he could know about Drew. I was absolutely sure of that. So why did I feel so afraid? I told myself to act normal, to pretend like everything was fine. But the problem was, I had been distant and cold for so long that I wasn't even sure what normal was anymore. I tried my best, but even I could tell it wasn't enough. I could feel the wall between us growing higher, and I had no idea how to stop it. Tom's perspective for the next couple of weeks, I was running on autopilot. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. Even though I hadn't seen much, I didn't need to. I knew. I was as sure as I could be. There was no doubt in my mind. The people at work noticed something was off. Alice, my secretary, and several other staff members kept asking if I was okay. They said I seemed distracted, distant. I couldn't bring myself to say what was really bothering me. I liked my employees. I respected them, but I had always maintained a certain level of distance. I was the boss. They were my team. I never let personal matters get in the way of business. But I guess they could tell that something was seriously wrong. And if I had to guess, they probably drew straws to see who would be the unlucky one to talk to me about it. I had been keeping my office door shut lately, trying to focus, trying to drown out my thoughts. I was sitting at my desk, staring blankly out the window, when I heard the door open quietly and then shut. Footsteps. Someone walked in and sat down in the chair across from my desk. I didn't turn around right away. Instead, I played a small game with myself, trying to guess who it was. Then, I heard a quiet clearing of the throat. A woman. Curiosity got the better of me. I turned around and found myself looking at Donna. Donna was the newest member of my team, a sharp, confident woman in her mid-30s. She always dressed professionally, but there was no denying that she was an attractive woman. She gave me a knowing look. "Well, I guess you already know why I'm here," she said. "We took a vote, and I lost." I raised an eyebrow. "So, you took a vote, and you're here." And Donna crossed her arms and glared at me. "Tom, you're a good guy. Everyone here used to really like working for you." I caught the way she said it. Used to. Just in case I hadn't been paying attention, she emphasized it again. "So," she continued, "we came up with a solution to our problem." I raised an eyebrow. "And what problem is that?" She leaned forward slightly, her expression calm but firm. "We know you're a private guy. We get it. You don't really talk about your personal life, and that's fine. But whatever is going on with you, it's personal, and it's serious. And whether you like it or not, it's affecting everyone around you." I opened my mouth to protest, but she held up a hand to stop me. "Here's the deal," she said. "You need someone to talk to. And I'm here. Also, I'm not leaving until you do talk. And before you even ask, yes, this stays between us. Whatever you say in this office stays in this office." I was stunned. I had no idea I'd been causing so much tension among my employees. For a long moment, I just stared at Donna, and she stared right back, waiting. Then, somehow, I started talking. I never made a conscious decision to open up. It just happened. I talked and talked and talked, and she just listened. No judgment. No interruptions. Just quiet support. As I spoke, I could feel the anger rising in my voice, the frustration tightening my chest. I paced back and forth, like a caged animal, pouring everything out. Donna didn't say much, but she didn't have to. She wasn't there to fix anything, just to listen. And somehow, that was enough. Almost 2 hours later, I finally began to slow down. Eventually, I sat back down, feeling emotionally drained but lighter than I had in weeks. "Thanks," I muttered. Just one word. She nodded. "You're welcome." Then she got up and quietly left my office. After she left, I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. And for the first time in a while, I started really thinking about what I needed to do. My life had become a mess, but maybe, just maybe, I could start putting the pieces back together. At home, things remained mostly the same. I continued to keep my distance from my wife. But at work, things started to feel normal again. With one exception, I started having lunch with Donna a few times a week. It turned out she was one of the most confident and emotionally stable people I had ever met. And to put things in perspective, no, I wasn't romantically interested in her. And she was never going to be interested in me. Donna was very open about the fact that she was gay. She didn't make a big deal out of it, but she didn't hide it either. And with Donna, I found something I hadn't had in years. A real friend. Someone I could talk to about anything and everything. Slowly, with her help, I started making a plan for my life. The first priority? My children. They deserved a stable home. And that meant they needed parents who at the very least could get along. Donna helped me realize that while I didn't have to be overly cheerful, I did need to stop being so bitter and withdrawn. It wasn't easy, but I made a conscious effort to be more present with my kids, to let go of some of the resentment, to start having short, civil conversations with Eve. I still couldn't bring myself to be close to her. I still couldn't tolerate her touch, but I could at least exist in the same room with her. And as the weeks passed, I found that sometimes I could even enjoy her company, if only for brief moments. One morning, I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and reading the paper when I happened to glance up. And what I saw stunned me. Eve looked fragile. She had lost weight. Her shoulders were slumped. She seemed hesitant, almost afraid to meet my eyes. She flinched slightly at the sound of my voice when I spoke. "Are you okay?" I asked, my concern slipping out before I could stop it. "You don't look well. Have you thought about seeing a doctor?" She looked startled. For a long moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't quite believe what she had heard. Then, suddenly, tears spilled down her face. "It's been so long since I've heard you say my name, Tom." Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper, choked with emotion. "I'm almost ready to give up. I don't have much left in me to keep holding on. For you." She swallowed hard, then asked, her voice trembling, "Are we ever going to be all right?" The pain and resignation in her words made my chest tighten. After everything, after all this time, I finally admitted to myself what I had been afraid to face. "I still love you, Eve," I said quietly, "but I can't tell you that we're going to be okay. Because I don't know." For a long moment, she just stared at me, her eyes filled with heartbreak. Then slowly she nodded. Through her tears, I could see that she understood, because she knew I was right. The divorce was amicable. Evelyn and I agreed that above all else, our children, Maggie and Bill, came first. Initially, Evelyn retained primary custody while I took them on weekends. It wasn't perfect, but we made it work. A year later, I met Sophia. She was a kind-hearted teacher with a warmth that seemed to reach even the most wounded parts of me. She brought stability, light, and for the first time in a long while, hope. Our wedding was small and intimate, with Maggie and Bill playing key roles. The children bonded with Sophia quickly. She treated them with love, patience, and care. Watching them laugh together, seeing them feel safe and happy again, I knew I had made the right choice. Evelyn,